Let's talk about the new Netflix documentary about the Mormon counselor turned influencer Jodi Hildebrandt and her accomplice Ruby Franke. Now, you might be a bit confused when I say new documentary, given there have been 3 on this topic in the last 10 months or so. Hulu last March produced Devil in the Family, The Fall of Ruby Franke. A few months later, HBO and Discovery put out Ruby and Jodi, A Cult of Sin and Influence. And don't confuse either of these with the 2024 Lifetime movie, Mormon Mom Gone Wrong, where Jodi Hildebrandt is played by none other than Heather Locklear. The documentary I'm talking about, however, is the Netflix documentary Evil Influencer, the Jodi Hildebrandt Story, and it has enjoyed some of the top spots in Netflix's movie list since its release on December 30th. Now, I've received a lot of comments asking for me to dig into this documentary, and I finally got a chance to watch it, so I thought I would discuss it here. Though I want to make clear from the start, this is not a happy story. It's a tragic story, and one of the things that this most recent documentary does quite well is it goes into the atrocious abuse that was inflicted on young children. So please take the trigger warning before you go forward. I won't talk about those gruesome details much here, but in the documentary itself, you need to be prepared. Now, the Hildebrandt and Franke story is fascinating in its own right. But it's also interesting because it touches on larger issues, both within Mormonism as a culture, as well as how America likes to view and investigate Mormonism. What leads so many Mormons to become radical? Are Mormons more likely to fall prey to these types of schemes? And why are Americans so obsessed with uncovering these stories of Mormon extremism? So I want to do a few things in this video. First, I'll summarize the Hildebrandt and Franke story in case you haven't kept up with it. 2, I will dig into this new documentary, talk about what I liked, what I didn't like, what are some of the key arguments, and what are the lessons we can take from this portrayal. And finally, I want to touch on this American obsession with the Mormon extremism. What, in other words, does the current Mormon moment in American culture tell us about United States society? That's enough of a opening. Let's dig in. In case you haven't kept up with the Hildebrandt and Franke saga, let me offer at least a basic primer. This is Jodi Hildebrandt. She used to be a church-approved counselor who focused on things like family, sex addiction, and pornography, and then became quite popular in Utah, with many clients, women and men alike, saying that she was able to tap into something within their culture that allows them to engage issues that had previously been left aside. There are especially a number of women who claim that she was able to empower them, offer them a sense of women's authority that they did not find in other segments of life and Mormon society. More on that in a bit. However, Hildebrandt did have her counseling license revoked in 2012 due to a breach of confidentiality, and in the ensuing years, she adopted increasingly radical positions as she pushed back against what she denounced as modernity's corruptions and the problems of progressivism, especially in the family. Then you have Ruby Franke. Ruby Franke came to cultural prominence due to her YouTube influencer days, where she and her husband and their 6 kids displayed their lives in the 8 Passengers channel, which had millions upon millions of followers. Although over the years, like Hildebrandt, she took increasingly more conservative and radical positions, and toward the end was seen much more as a culture warrior. In a previous video I've done on my channel where I talked about the Hulu documentary, I emphasize how her evolution tells us a lot about the evolution of Mormon culture during these years, moving from optimistic perfectionism of the 2012 Mormon moment era to a much more pessimistic apocalypticism rife with partisanship of today. Now, Franke and Hildebrandt would come to work together, creating connections, a training and counseling system for lots of couples and families, as well as has an Instagram account, Moms of Truth, which represented their much more radical and partisan approaches, fitting the much more partisan era of the last few years. Finally, Franke and Hildebrandt faced major legal problems when, after Hildebrandt moved in with the Frankes, and they were vacillating between their home up in northern Utah and Hildebrandt's massive mansion down in southern Utah, that one of Ruby Franke's kids escaped and was able to get help from a neighbor, and they discovered the atrocious torture that was being inflicted on the Frankes' children. Hildebrandt and Franke were eventually charged and then pled guilty to multiple counts of aggravated child abuse, sentences that they are now serving in Utah penitentiaries. Before I go any further, my traditional reminder that if you enjoy this type of nerdy content where we dig into religion and culture and politics, both connecting the past with the present, make sure you are subscribed to this channel. I try to do deep dives on particular historical topics every Monday. On Wednesdays, I connect the past to the present, like through documentaries and pop culture in this video. And on Fridays, I pull back the curtain and talk about the historian's craft, either through interviewing historians, digging into new books, or talking about the sources behind historical interpretations. And I also strongly recommend subscribing to my KIT newsletter. I send out newsletter broadcasts, they're called at KIT, every other week or so, which allows you to keep up with my various videos and social media productions and interviews and activities and events, and it's lots of fun, and it's free, of course. So please, you can sign up. There's a link to the newsletter in the video description. And by the way, if you are in Utah, I'm swinging through the state at the end of this month, and the great folks at Benchmark Books, the best Mormon history bookstore in the state, is having me sign some copies on Tuesday, January 27th from 5 to 6 p.m. So if you want me to sign any books, that's a good time to come and say hello. Anyways, let's get back to the documentary. Perhaps a good starting point for discussing this new documentary, Evil Influencer, is comparing it to what we had before. Now, I haven't watched the HBO and Discovery series Jodi and Ruby, but I have watched the Hulu series Devil in the Family. In fact, that was one of my first videos posted on this YouTube channel. So if you want to, you can go back and watch my dissection of that documentary and the things I liked and didn't like about it. Well, that documentary, Devil in the Family, focused on the Frankes. It spoke primarily from a family perspective, telling a family story. Most of the material came from the Franke family themselves, which meant they got lots of access from both Kevin Franke, the husband of Rudy, as well as the older children. I found the older children very moving and convincing in their stories. And by the way, the daughter now has a book that came out that I haven't read yet. That's probably quite important to understand the Franke story. Kevin Franke might be a bit more complicated, but that's a story for another day. This new documentary, Evil Influencer, of course, is focused on Jodi Hildebrandt. So whereas Jodi Hildebrandt comes in at the end of Devil in the Family, is kind of this corruption within the family story, Hildebrandt is the main character here, and instead of being told from a family perspective, this documentary is told from the investigator's perspective. And the most important interviews are not coming from inside family members, but rather from police and investigators, and especially, most importantly, some of the victims of Jodi Hildebrandt's counseling service. And perhaps one of the best things that this new documentary has going for it is it's shorter. Not every documentary needs to be 4 parts. I enjoyed this one part, less than 2 hours. I thought it was quite compact. So other things I enjoyed about this new documentary, Evil Influencer, about Jodi Hildebrandt. I really appreciated how the show focused on the ways in which Hildebrandt's connections programs filled several vacuums within Mormon culture, both the lack of access to or appreciation for therapy, and how she was able to take advantage of these women and men yearning for help. The idea of women's empowerment, that there were very few spaces that women could go to hear from other women validating their perspectives, and that's something that Hildebrandt was able to capitalize on. And sex education. There is a drastic lack of sex education in Mormon culture, and Hildebrandt was able to take advantage of that in counseling with these families, and then once lured in, was able to move in other directions. I also appreciated how Evil Influencer, very expertly, I believe, was able to interweave central Mormon themes. I'll go in detail on a few later, but just for now, I really liked how it talked about influencer culture, both the formal types of influence, where Hildebrandt was a missionary and Franke was, and as well as a YouTube, as well as a counselor, and the informal type of influencing, which is what Franke was doing on YouTube. I really appreciate how it dove into porn addiction as a key needle point in Mormon culture, this sense of shame that pervades much of Mormon society that enables many to fall prey to the type of teachings that Hildebrandt was offering. And also, I enjoyed Evil Influencer's focus on the drastic measures many Latter-day Saint families took in order to preserve their traditional family. That this worshiping of the traditional family was one of the key ingredients that enabled Hildebrandt's radical teachings to take hold. And speaking of Hildebrandt, you might expect this since it's a documentary focused on Hildebrandt, but I really appreciated a lot of the backstory that was offered. Digging into her time as a missionary, her first marriage, they interviewed one of her former missionary companions who I thought gave excellent background and insight. So Hildebrandt is much more of a three-dimensional figure in this story than you might see elsewhere. I thought it was a very compelling use of the various victims, those who had Jodi as counselors, both men and women, and how her actions turned their lives upside down. And they also had excellent expert analysis. Natasha Helfer, who is a sex therapist in LDS communities, was able to give really great perspectives, allowing us to understand how that process worked and what Hildebrandt was able to capitalize on. And just in visual terms, I thought it was beautifully shot with these gorgeous aerial footage, especially of southern Utah, which I'll get to later, and these moments where you would flip the perspective of going upside down, kind of capturing the distorted nature of the perspectives being discussed in the documentary itself. So in general, I found the documentary very compelling, very measured, and very responsible in its analysis of the role that LDS culture played in Hildebrandt's tragedies. So how central was Mormonism to Jodi Hildebrandt's activities? One of Jodi Hildebrandt's neighbors interviewed for this documentary, and it's one of the last words given in the show, said, quote, "I don't think this could have happened anywhere else." Well, yes and no. This does happen lots of places. Otherwise, we would not have this vibrant true crime obsession in America. But I think it is fair to say that there are some uniquely Mormon elements in many of these true crime stories, especially the Hildebrandt one. So in other words, I don't think it's entirely true that this couldn't have happened anywhere else. But there is some truth to it. So let's take this on two prongs. One, are Mormons particularly prone to these types of schemes? Well, women, as the documentary makes clear, were anxious for the type of empowerment that Hildebrandt offered, which made them more desperate. And further, families were willing to do drastic things in order to preserve the family. There's a shame that surrounds divorce and a fear of not living up to the ideal. One of the victims interviewed in the documentary, when explaining the horrible things he did at the request of Hildebrandt, said, "I would have done anything to save my family." And I think that anxiety, of course, is shared broadly, but is understood in a particular way within Mormondom. And then, of course, there's a sense of gullibility, where Jodi's neighbors, the same one who said that I don't think this could have happened anywhere else, said that Utahns and Mormons trust each other. They give each other the benefit of the doubt, which is one of the things behind the common saying that MLMs, multi-level marketing, has much more success in Utah due to these connections and trust that Latter-day Saints have in their fellow members. No way they would leave them astray. So that's the first prong. Are Mormons more gullible? Kind of. It fits within a certain context. Second, are Mormons particularly skilled at perpetuating these types of scheme? I think about all the teachings that we capture in this documentary that Hildebrandt was sharing with her followers, her victims, that made sense in a Mormon context and would not make sense outside of that world. Her defining of addiction as rooted in the natural man as an enemy of God, which is taken directly from Book of Mormon scripture. Her references to her patriarchal blessing, giving her a sense of duty and mission that drove her and convinced others. Her use of notions of apostasy when she was discussing distortion in the world. That was a key theme in her later years, truth versus distortion. That very easily maps onto the teachings of restoration versus apostasy. So Latter-day Saints provided her the playbook. And further, when she gets in trouble, there is a long history of persecution complex within Mormonism, so Hildebrandt is able to denounce the witch hunt of those who are after her as part of this worldly opposition. And when they're both in jail, Ruby compares Jodi to Joseph Smith as a misunderstood prophet while they were under attack. And so we see in Jodi Hildebrandt and Ruby Franke this expression of Mormon extremism that's always under the surface but could bubble out, not reflective of the entire community, but is certainly a part of it. These extreme teachings and control, the language of radical prophets opposing the world, the nature of revelation disrupting the status quo, all things that made them especially empowered to radicalize during the COVID years of 2020, where it seemed all their conspiracies were coming true and they had to turn to more radical positions. In fact, I'll restate one of my points from my earlier documentary on the devil and the family, Hulu documentary, of how Jodi is in many ways the inversion of a fundamentalist prophet. She is claiming her own revelations that are countercultural. She takes an authoritarian position. She controls the bodies of her followers, including their sexual activities. She is separating families according to her own interests, and she became more radical as the walls closed around her. She is a female Warren Jeffs in those ways. A visual image that is reinforced by these aerial shots of the southern Utah desert, which of course are also a staple in the Keep Sweet documentary and all the other documentaries about Mormon fundamentalism, and also are the backdrop to Jodi Hildebrandt's atrocities, which again took place in southern Utah. So much of these claims of Mormonism's connection to this radicalism are true, but do they get a disproportionate amount of attention? That's another question that deserves considering. So now we're shifting our focus to the American obsession with Mormonism. We often speak about these Mormon moments, these defined times in which the American society is fascinated not just with Mormonism, but a particular type of Mormonism. And those obsessions often tell us just as much about American society as they do about the Latter-day Saints. Think about the Mormon moment surrounding 2012, that time that Mitt Romney was running for the presidency. That time was focused on Mormon optimistic performance and diversity. That was the era of the I'm a Mormon campaign, when Mormon was not a bad word. And it seemed that American pluralism was so accepting, so diverse, that even the Mormons could fit. Now we live in a very different society, and we see those distinctions at play in the cultural fascination with Mormonism. Think about the most dominant expressions of Mormonism in 2020s. Secret Lives of Mormon Wives, Real Housewives of Salt Lake City, Under the Banner of Heaven, the Hulu television show, Chad Daybell and Lori Vallow, who of course have received their extent of documentaries and features and books and magazine articles. And then now, Hildebrandt and Franke. What do we learn from these types of obsessions? These people making, gaining the American attention. Well, obviously, scandal and sex is going to be a key part of it. But I think you also see in this a fascination with religious hypocrisy. That there must be something sinister beneath Mormonism's squeaky clean image that appears too good to be true. Something nefarious behind those Mormon smiles. A reaffirmation that goes all the way back to the thesis of John Krakauer, who wrote the book Under the Banner of Heaven, upon which the Hulu series was based. That at the heart of any real revealed religion, especially Mormonism, is irrationality and violence. I think we see that play out, that these stories are confirming the long-held assumptions. So Americans are using Mormons to study or to reflect notions of how religion is performed, how misinformation and manipulation are practiced, how religion can be reduced to radicalism, how extremism is found and hid and discovered and unwielded at large measures, and how do media personalities hide their darker truths. So no, these types of media depictions that are found across the spectrum do not accurately capture Mormonism, but they never were meant to. Instead, they're capturing these broader themes that Mormonism is used as a useful performer of a deeper American anxiety. I would regret if I closed this video without hinting to and outlining one broader concern, which is a concern with the broader true crime world. That in our obsession with these true crime stories, we often lose sight at the tragedy at the heart of those episodes in our quest for entertainment. And I think it's fair to ask how much we are capitalizing on our perverse fascination with trauma in order to just have must-see television. And of course, Mormonism fits into that much larger dynamic. But I will really close on a central tension, a paradox that I think is at the heart of this depiction of Mormonism and much of the modern media obsession with Mormon culture. And that's two things can be true at once. And you often see people focusing on one or the other. One, there is something in Mormonism that allows individuals to move to extreme violence or extreme concern or extreme hypocrisy. That there's something that's unique within the LDS community that's worth study and examination that breeds extremism. At the same time, whatever that thing is, whatever the thing that makes Mormonism unique, it's not the totality of the Mormon experience, nor is it probably even a major part of the Mormon experience, yet it dominates the conversation to a disproportionate degree. Which is why, on the one hand, I consume these new productions, and I appreciate the care that they give on the Mormon story, while I also worry that we're getting a distorted image of what Mormonism is through this obsession with true crime. All right, that's my soapbox. I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you found it useful. If so, make sure to hit the like button, share it with others so we can broaden the conversation. If you haven't yet, you can subscribe to this channel. And if you want to give back, and I'm so grateful for the many of you who have given back, you can become a member of the channel, which for a nominal fee, you can get early access to the videos. History has never been more relevant than it is today, because even these depictions of modern day cultural and religious matters have a history. And without understanding that history, much of this that we are experiencing in 2026, I can't believe it's 2026 anymore. Anyways, much of what we're experiencing in 2026 doesn't make sense without understanding what came before.